Hi, and welcome to On the Table. My name is Corie, and I'm here with my friend Rachel. And today we are going to be discussing suffering from a Christian point of view.
Yes.
And there are so many different ways that we could take this.
We really could.
Yeah. But, this problem of pain, this problem of suffering in the Christian life really has been an issue that Christians have had to deal with since the institution of Christianity, for about 2,000 years.
Yeah.
And because some people have this concept that, when you become a Christian, that God has given you a guarantee that he's always going to be with you, and that means that everything's going to be okay. And you're never going to face anything bad, and you're never going to be sick, and and that's just not, when that doesn't happen, then people get really confused.
Yeah. Because we know we will have trouble. Scripture tells us we will have trouble.
Yeah.
There will be hard times. There will be difficulties. But what do you do? What causes it? I know one of the popular questions, and it's usually not asked by Christians. It's usually asked by non-believers. Well, if there's a God, why is there so much suffering in the world?
Right.
And it's a legitimate question, but at the same time, you could also ask the question, well, because there's a God who loves us, why isn't there more suffering at the same time?
What do you mean by that?
Well, I think there's a lot of people who, generally speaking, there is suffering throughout, I think, everyone's life. Mm-hmm. But for the most part, we don't live in our entire lives in suffering on earth. And even for those who do, there is an eternity without suffering.
Right.
And we wouldn't have that otherwise.
I see. Mm-hmm.
So you could flip it the other way if you wanted. You don't have to. But some of the reasons I think that there for suffering are varied. You could have done something to cause your own suffering.
I think that's very common. You stub your toe, or or you do a crime, you pay the time,
or you eat too much of something you shouldn't, and you will suffer the consequences.
If you're allergic to dairy and you go to Dairy Queen and you just binge like mad, it's gonna hurt later.
It's gonna hurt.
Yeah.
But then there are other suffering that we can't control.
Yes.
There are sicknesses, there are diseases that are out of our control.
Mm-hmm. Death of loved ones.
Death, we can't escape that. That's a kind of suffering. And then there's also Satan. Mm-hmm. We have an enemy. He is out to get us. Mm-hmm. And sometimes he does things. And we see this in the account in the Bible of Job.
Yep.
He just attacks him with everything he's got, everything that God will give him permission to do to Job. Poor Job loses everything. Mm-hmm. His children, all of his wealth, his home, and even his wife at the end says, you know what, just curse God and die.
Mm-hmm.
And
he won't. He doesn't.
Because
he's determined that he's going to get an answer from God.
Yep. But there's still that immense amount of suffering. Mm-hmm. And it's a difficult, challenging issue. And it's really hard when you're in it.
Yes.
I think you can, I'm sitting here talking about suffering while I am not suffering. Mm-hmm. I don't have any illnesses or diseases. I don't have anything that's wrong with me at this moment. So I can sit here and talk about suffering from a good, safe place.
Yeah.
But it's a little harder when you have those times where, why God, why? You just have to ask, why me? What is the purpose for my suffering? Is there a purpose? Is this just someone's having fun at my expense? Or maybe I need to learn from this.
Yeah, and I think when you're talking about world scale makes sense because everyone can look in the world and we can say, you know what, we've generally kicked God out of the world.
Yep.
So it makes sense that even if God is good and all loving and all powerful and all knowledgeable, because he's a respecter of human free will, he can't come in and he won't come in and just solve the problem of human hunger.
Yeah.
Even if he wants to, because he respects human will and human free will, and at some point we have to stand up and solve those problems ourselves and take matters into our own hands and be the difference. But we don't, do we? We just like to complain and blame it on God. But when it does come to personal and individual suffering for the Christian, it is something different. And I think a lot of times you will never know the reason for your own suffering.
Yeah.
And human beings are programmed to ask questions. We are programmed to cry out, why, oh God? And you may get an answer and you may not get an answer. But one thing is for sure is that God can use suffering to change you. He can use pain to teach you and change you and make you a more rounded Christian and human being, God-loving human being, and made in the image of God human being on the other side of that suffering. And there is suffering that you carry with you your entire life, especially the death of a loved one and loss and things like that. You carry that with you. And so, I think as Christians, a lot of times if we're not the one going through that suffering, we don't really know what to do. And so a lot of times we start to try to answer that question for people. We try to answer the why. Yeah. We try to say, well, if that person had lived, maybe this would have happened, or maybe that would have happened, or, we try to justify things. We do. And we make it worse because guaranteed, if you're trying to answer the question, the person who's going through the suffering has already asked the question. Yeah. And no answer that you give will be sufficient, because when you're dealing with a severe loss, you can justify anything. I don't care if something terrible would have happened. I could have had 3 more months with that person. Yep. Or I could, you don't care. So a lot of times I think as Christians, because just as human beings, but definitely as Christians, we need to be more respectful of it. If you feel the need to answer that question, why? Don't in specific situations, because the person who's going through it, they've already asked that question.
Sometimes the answer can be, I don't know. That's an appropriate answer sometimes. Yeah. And there is suffering too, where if someone's suffering with an illness or something, and I think sometimes Christians make the mistake of saying, well, maybe it's sin.
Right.
And we're not talking about original sin as a problem. We know original sin causes suffering. There's no
You mean
no
like
question.
You did something bad
specifically
and then this
did something bad and it's a consequence of that. Now maybe that's the case. Maybe you actually did do something and you're now suffering for it. But it's probably not a very wise decision to throw that in someone's face and say, you sinned. Now you have to own it. That's
That's entirely helpful.
Gracious or helpful at all. No.
Because that you saying it, if that is the case, say you really believe that's the case, that someone is going through something physical because of a spiritual thing that they have done. If that is the case, it's not going to change by you telling them that. They have to come to that conclusion by themselves, and then they have to deal with it in their own life with God.
Pray for them, pray with them.
Yeah. And I mean, if they ask you point blank, what do you think is the cause of this? You can be gentle and you can say,
maybe this is it.
This is what I think, but I'm not God. I could be wrong, but consider this. Yeah. Consider
but I don't know is always really, really a good, just in case, Yeah.
And it's always good to remember too that, Christ suffered. The apostles suffered. Yeah. The disciples suffered. So if you are going through suffering as a Christian, you are in very good company. Jesus Christ accepted the suffering. He knew that it was coming. He was afraid of it. We see this in the Garden of Gethsemane in the gospel narratives. Mm-hmm. He didn't want to go through it. He was afraid of it. He knew it was coming. And at the end of his conversation with God, he said, but okay. I will go through it. Mm-hmm. He faced it. So when you're faced with suffering, we do have to find that bravery to face it and to accept it for what it is. It's suffering, it's painful, it's hurtful. But by that acceptance of it, you can then move through it and allow God to change you and to strengthen you and just be with you.
It's that perspective of victimization versus I'm choosing to walk through this. Mm-hmm. If you take the whatever suffering you're going through and say, you know what, I'm a victim. There's nothing I can do. Why me? Yep. You're gonna suffer through it. But if you can turn around and say, okay, I'm going through this, whatever it is, awful situation, horrible illness, whatever it is, and say, you know what? I don't know why, but maybe there is purpose. And
Yep.
so I'm going to pray through it. I'm going to allow this to grow my faith in the Lord. He is going to bring me through this, and to come out on the other side stronger.
Yeah.
It does have a way of equipping you for ministry.
Yep.
Unfortunately, a lot of people who are in ministry, a lot of people who are, especially people who have been in ministry for a long time, or a lot of those wonderful speakers that we know and love so much, a lot of them have gone through immense suffering for years, and you don't always hear about it because they don't necessarily share it, but a lot of them have gone through immense suffering to get there, and we look at them now and we're like, oh, look, they're on a stage, they're being loved by so many people, and so many people have benefited from their ministry.
Their words are so deep, they know God so well, they understand the Bible.
That's it, though. Why do they know God so well?
Yeah.
Because they have suffered, and they've
They've
had to
go
get
through it.
that point where they cling to the Lord, and
Yeah.
that's all that matters. And that's why on the other side of it, they can say He is all that matters, because they've given up everything in those moments to say the toys in our life don't matter, because He's what matters, and they can truly say it. And that's what sets those people apart. So it's one of the, and that's a really you got to be careful when you wish for those things that people have.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
You
Like
do.
when you really want to have that big
yeah.
ministry and be
It's
loved.
like praying for patience.
Don't do that.
When you pray for
Unless
patience,
you're
how
ready
do you
to
get
get it.
patience? You have to go through situations
You
that
have to
require
become
you
a
to be
patient person. Yeah. So it's challenging. But I think another thing that's important to remember with suffering is we shouldn't be suffering alone. We should suffer in community. And that's, again, where the body of Christ, the church, really plays a part. We need to come around and surround those people in our congregations who are suffering so deeply with things. And everyone is going through something. I remember a few weeks ago, I talked with several people in my church that I hadn't connected with in a while, and everyone was going through something that honestly was kind of a world-ending situation. And I felt very overwhelmed by the end of the week, just knowing this person's going through this difficult time. This person's going through a totally different type of difficult situation. Yep. And it's challenging to just help to be that strength to say, you know what, I'm going to pray with you. I'm going to pray for you, and to be helpful in this suffering, because I can't do anything else.
Yeah.
Like I can't help you in any way.
Even just being kind to people, and not trying to correct their theology when they're going through suffering.
Yeah.
And you allow them
Let
to
God
ask
do
questions.
that. Let God do that.
Let them ask those questions. You know, why would God do this? I don't think this is fair. Let them ask those questions. Let them have those thoughts.
Yeah. And sometimes it's not.
Yeah.
Like sometimes we are dealt
life isn't
a really
fair.
stinky deck. It's not a fair situation, but you're still going to have to go through it, and how you go through it and who you go through it with makes a difference. And I think that's one of the things that's really important to keep in mind, is to not cast God out when we're faced with suffering, because He wants to step in. Just ask. He wants to step in.
And you can believe that He's with you even when you don't feel it.
Yeah.
Going through suffering in my own life, there are so many times where it felt like I was completely alone and God wasn't with me.
No one understands.
And you just have to, you really just have to remind yourself of what you believe and what you know to be true. You know, I believe that God said that He would never leave me and never forsake me. Even if my father and mother forsake me, God will never leave me. And I know that to be true. So even though I don't feel it, I choose to believe it, and I'm just going to keep moving forward. And, you know, it's a process. Yeah. Getting through suffering and getting through pain and being able to bear that, it's definitely a process. But yeah, I think too, when it comes to suffering, we have to be brave enough to move forward with our lives. Yeah. Because there's a certain kind of suffering that will make you afraid of moving on. You know, when the big part of the pain is gone, and you've gotten yourself together enough to live life. Yeah. It's scary to trust God, because God has allowed this previous suffering to happen. What if it comes back? And it might. And you know, as Christians, we can't tell someone it'll never happen again. You've gone through it once; it'll never happen again. It could.
It could happen.
Could. That's part of yielding to God, of surrendering to God,
Yeah.
and it's not a popular message, and it's not an easy message, and it's not an easy one to live.
No.
But that's part of coming before God and humbling yourself before Him. It's that submission. It's that yield button where you're like, okay, I know suffering could happen. Good things could happen. Bad things can happen. Even like when you're faced with a situation that's very scary, if you get a bad report from the doctor, or if you're about to go into a make it or break it situation with your life, financially, physically, whatever it is, a lot of people say, don't worry, all things work out for good to them who love the Lord. That means nothing when it comes to, is this going to turn out the way I want it to or not? There's no guarantee that it's going to turn out the way you want it to. But the guarantee is that God will always be with you. Nothing has happened to you that's going to surprise God.
No.
He's there. He can use it. He can strengthen you.
Yeah.
You can get through it. But to be a Christian necessitates that you yield yourself to God and you accept that.
Yeah.
That you trust God despite that.
Yeah, and it's not fun to go through. It's not fun to watch people go through.
No.
But it is a really good opportunity on the outside of suffering, when you see a friend or relative suffering, to find a way to step in and be merciful and to show compassion, especially when people, depending on where they are in their relationship with the Lord, it's a really good opportunity to step in and to say, you know what, I'm just going to be very gracious with this, and I'm going to show compassion to someone who is having a really, really hard time.
Right.
And unfortunately, in the world today, there are a ton of people that are going through a lot of really difficult situations. You don't have to go far to find suffering.
No. And you know what? People may not even be in a place where they can tell you about it, where they can talk about it. So be kind.
Yeah. Be nice to everyone.
Gracious and be generous, because you don't know what people are going through.
Yeah. A lot of people don't like to talk about the things that are most painful. People will tell you about, the crappy things that happen in the day, but no one's going to tell you. That's not true. A lot of people don't want to tell you the deep things that, you start to talk about it and you can't stop crying. You don't want to tell everyone about those things.
Yeah, and sometimes it's not like an appropriate situation. Like maybe they're willing to tell you, but you're in the middle of a grocery store. So like, that's not going to work out.
You don't want to talk about it then. But it is important to show that compassion and to be able to be the hands of Christ and to move in that direction. So, the other thing is to not waste your suffering. Yes. And that's a really hard thing to say, because I've gone through those suffering moments in my life where I just want it to be over. I don't care what it takes. If there was a pill to make this go away, I would really like to take it, because you're just in so much pain. It's so hard. You just can't even think straight. But that's not the attitude we should take. I say that very carefully. But we need to make sure we're not wasting our suffering, because if there's a purpose, it would be really good to grow through it so you can get past it, so you can get over it and you don't have to experience it again.
Yes.
Pain is information. I believe it was C.S. Lewis who said pain is God's megaphone. And it's true. When you're in pain, all of a sudden you're willing to listen. It's like, okay, God, I'm in a lot of pain. What would you like to tell me? Because I am so ready to hear it. So it is a megaphone for him to reach into our lives, and it's a good opportunity to respond and kind of almost erase everything else from your life, the hobbies, the toys, the distractions that we don't need, and to say, okay, God, where should I be? Where should I be headed? Where should I be going? And in the case of needing healing, praying for healing, but moving towards God, away from the stuff and towards God. That's the point of the Christian life. That should be the goal.
Always. No matter what.
But sometimes we need that pain to remind us, okay, I'm not headed in the right direction.
I think a challenge too with suffering and just with pain in general is to not allow it to control us, and to not use it as an excuse.
And that's hard, because a lot of people like to use their pain, their diseases, their issues as an excuse because it's easy.
It's easy, and our culture does it, but as Christians, we're not allowed to do it.
Yeah.
Because our experiences happen to us. We are not our experiences. God has created us to be someone with a purpose. If you're alive, if you're breathing, you have a purpose here on the earth. So, if you're alive and breathing, you are not your suffering. You are not that experience that you've had. So the goal still needs to be move through it, be stronger because of it. And yes, you'll carry it. You'll carry the scars. You'll carry the memories. You'll carry the images. But one challenge is not allowing yourself to be controlled by that and not using it as an excuse to get out of things that you don't want to do, or to be a lazy Christian, for lack of a better kind of expression. Which can be challenging because there are things that do happen to you when you go through a tremendous amount of pain and suffering. Psychological things can happen to you, but the amazing thing about God and about the human body is that we don't have to live in that suffering. We can move through it. We can move through psychological trauma, and God will help us if we allow him. And it takes time, but you can do it. Don't use it as an excuse, and don't stay living in that, because God has given us, actually that brings me to 2 Timothy 1, where Paul's giving Timothy advice, and he goes, I remind you, Timothy, keep ablaze the gift of God that is in you through the laying on of hands. So that's active. You have to work at staying passionate with God and having a relationship with him. It takes work. Keep that ablaze. For God has not given us a spirit of fearfulness, but instead a spirit of power, love, and sound judgment. And some translations even translate that sound mind. So that I find that extremely helpful when it comes to suffering, because it's true. It can, you feel messed up after. You feel emotionally and psychologically messed up sometimes.
And it can skew your perspective. You can make you, you change your opinion on things, and that's okay. But the point would be to focus and
move through it.
Move through it. Then you don't have to stay there.
Yes. You shouldn't want to stay there. Don't torture yourself. You shouldn't want to stay there. And God doesn't want you to stay there either. He wants you to be active. He wants you to be able to live life. And help other people.
And that's the point, is to go into all the world and make disciples. When you have that testimony of coming through hardships and suffering, you can take that testimony with you. And what a difference it will make. It can make if you let it in the life of another believer.
Not only then do you understand the human plight, human condition and human suffering, and you may not have experienced the exact same pain or suffering as someone else, but because you have experienced great pain and suffering, you have a lot more understanding and a lot more mercy and love and compassion when it comes to someone else. So not only do you have that, but you have a better understanding of what it means to be a Christian and to have a relationship with God. So it makes you so much more effective as a Christian living life, to be able to explain the principles that you read about in the Bible, because you've actually had to apply them in your own life. And it's hard work. It doesn't happen naturally.
It is.
So props to everyone going out there who's a Christian, who is suffering, who is in pain, and you're moving through it. Congratulations, because it's not an easy thing to do.
No, it's not.
But you are in good company. Christ suffered. Paul suffered. Peter suffered. All the famous apostles and disciples suffered. And we've got 2,000 years of history of Christians who have suffered and gone through pain and come out on the other side better than they were before. So take hope. There is another side. Yes, you will carry it with you. But there's hope.
Scars don't hurt.
Yes. And this life is finite. It will end. Suffering will end. But what you will take with you is the character that you have built through that suffering. You will take that with you into heaven, but you won't take the suffering. You won't take the pain. You'll just take the good character,
which is
building.
Exciting.
Yes, it is.
It will come to an end.
Yes, and that's
ultimately
the human
it will
hope.
come to an end.
That's the Christian hope that we have. That's that
Praise God.
anchor for our soul. Honestly. So I think that pretty much.
I think we've summed it up.
Yeah, yeah. So stick with it if you're going through suffering, and if you know someone who's going through suffering, be kind, pray for them, encourage them, and yeah, just try to be there. So thank you so much for joining us this time on the Table. Hopefully, we'll see you next time.